Chucky wanna play?
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
I am the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's work.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
They're here.
Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Gruesome Task podcast. My name is Deonte and I am here with my host,
Jose. I'm very glad to be here. Let's get this new week started.
Yes, today we have a movie for you all called Death by Temptation, released in 1990. We hope you all enjoy our podcast on it. Before we get to it, we just want to talk about our socials. You can follow the podcast at Gruesome Task Podcast on Instagram and on Twitter at The Gruesome Task. You can follow myself on Instagram at xdeontems and on Twitter at _undertheknife.
And you can find me on Instagram at j.a.gallegos. And I actually have a new Twitter handle, so it's going to be Spirited Jose. Just a little bit of a change.
Great. Thank you for letting me know. I will update that in the show notes as well, where you can always go down to find those social media handles, as well as our coupon code for Horror Pack. Again, Horror Pack is a monthly subscription service where you are able to get horror DVDs or Blu-rays shipped directly to your door. And if you use the code ITFOLLOWS, you can save yourself $3 on your Horror Pack.
Yeah, I highly encourage checking it out, even if it's just for 1 month. Get some new horror. Spice up your quarantine life. You get something new and, spend a couple hours on something that you haven't seen before.
Yes, and also, as always, you can leave us a review on iTunes. Give us whatever star rating you think is best. I would recommend 5. And you can also, if you end up leaving us a written review, we will read that on the show. Now, as we mentioned Horror Pack a little earlier with physical media, me and Jose are big proponents of physical media. And if you're interested in picking up a physical copy of the movie that we're going to talk about today, Death by Temptation, you can do so on Amazon. Currently, there is a 2018 Blu-ray release of the movie that is at $21.74 shipped, or you can pick up the DVD copy for $16.01.
Yeah, go check it out if you seem any slightest interested in it. Like he said, that we are definitely big supporters of physical media and supporting any type of physical media, really, music, movies, anything else really is definitely important to keep, these movies and music going.
Yes, and with that, let's go ahead and jump into the film a little bit. Give me a little bit of information on it, Jose.
Of course. So we have Death by Temptation this week. That was released on May 11th of 1990. The movie comes in at 1 hour and 35 minutes. It was written, directed, and produced by James Bond III. No correlation to the James Bond movies. It was put out through the production company Bonded Filmworks. Our budget came in at $54,582, and it grossed $2,218,579. So that's actually quite a bit of money there. Our cast, we have our Joel, played by James Bond III, the same one that wrote, directed, and produced the film. Kay is played by Kadeem Hardison. Dougie is played by Bill Nunn. Minister Garth is played by Samuel L. Jackson. Yes, that's Samuel L. Jackson. And our Temptress or Temptation is played by Cynthia Bond. One thing that I did find interesting about this was there was one nomination for Best Film. That was through the International Fantasy Film Awards at the Fantasporto. No idea where that is or what that's about, but it did have one nomination for the Best Film Award.
Interesting. It's such a crazy low budget for this movie, and the fact that it made that much is pretty surprising, because before we did look this up to watch this for the podcast, I had never heard of this film, and having a big name like Samuel L. Jackson in there, And then Kadeem Hardison, who at that time when this came out was huge because he was in that spinoff of the Cosby Show that they had made, and he was a part of the whole series they did. And so for this movie to just kind of be forgotten about is a little interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I was with you. I'd never heard about this film. I never had even, I was interested in. I wasn't interested into watching it at all. I had heard a lot of negative things about it as well. Just looking at the gross for this, I mean, it made tons of money, $2 million based off a $50,000 budget. So, yeah, I definitely agree. Although there's big name actors in this, and Kadeem also and Samuel L. Jackson also came out in that School Days movie by Spike Lee, like a few years later. So, I mean, it probably opened up some gateways, but you never know.
Yeah, and I know the grandma in the film, Minnie Gentry, she was also in that School Days film, and she even had a little bit of a role in the Cosby Show, the original, not the spinoff. And so it's kind of pretty intriguing that a lot of these actors kind of intertwine through different roles in other films previously to this coming out.
Yeah, I think after this, I definitely want to research more about James Bond III, like I said, written, directed, and produced this, and why he felt the need to do all three, and kind of star in this film as well, like what was going on there, and being supported by all these big name actors, how he got the traction for it. Definitely want to do some more research on that.
All right, and did you have anything else you wanted to add before we jump into the movie, or was that all your kind of background on it?
That's pretty much it. I'm ready to get into the film.
All right, let's do this. So 1990, Death by Temptation. We end up starting off the movie. The first kind of, I guess, big scene, if you will. It ends up involving a man who's a bartender, and he gets a call from a lady, and we can assume that over the phone he's being told that she's pregnant because the man begins to say, I'll pay for it, get you an abortion, all this kind of stuff. And while this is going on and he's having this conversation, it's cutting in and out of the intro, not credits, but all that kind of stuff. And it goes back to where he ends up making a call out saying how like, oh, I'm going to see you later. Right, baby? Okay. Yeah, I'll see you tonight. And we find out he's into some little freaky stuff because he mentions that he needs to get out his special handcuffs and all this other stuff. So, yeah, that's how the scene starts. Not very horror-esque, if you will, at all. But then we immediately, right away, get introduced to the temptress.
Yeah, so he's cleaning the bar, wiping it down, and he ends up coming to her where she's sitting, and she stops him by putting her hand on his, and he lights a cigarette for her. And this line she says is pretty kind of not necessarily super important, but it does come back later in the film. She says you should use a cigarette lighter, the flame lasts longer. And then they discuss her wanting to buy him a drink, and then she invites him to his place because he denies that drink because he's working as a bartender. And then it cuts to the next day, I believe, and he's all excited, dressed up in his nicest suit, and he's walking up to her place, goes inside, the door is wide open. Well, not wide open, but the door is open. And he walks up to her bedroom, and she's in there, and he can't really see her, but he lays on the bed, and he's describing, like, oh, the bed says a lot about a woman, and he's saying that the bed is freaky, and, they're going to get down to business. She invited him over for a reason. But another thing that kind of stood out was she has this big mirror, and he notices it, and it's covered, and he says, I believe it's a woman this fine, why is she covering up a mirror? She should be looking at herself all the time.
Yeah, and she ends up going back to she is there like in like lingerie and everything, and they start kissing and doing all this other stuff, and she wraps like a belt around his neck, and she leads him because instead of going to the bed, they decide to go to the shower. And they go to the shower and they're kissing, like making out, all that kind of stuff. But the shower water turns red and it's all bloody. And it's kind of weird because they're still just like going at it like normal. And then you see the guy like just, I guess, realize what's going on. So he stops the kissing and he's like freaking out, and he runs out just like booty butt naked, and he ends up going to the door because he wants to leave, but he can't leave, and he's screaming, and the camera cuts outside, and we just see the blood just oozing from under the door, and we hear the temptress's like evil laugh kind of in the background.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting because you kind of hear like a monster type growl as she's like devouring him, and you see the blood. So you don't get to see that in action. It's just open for interpretation. But the next scene, we get our minister Garth, who's played by Samuel Jackson, and he's preaching. But when the camera goes over his shoulder, it's just his son there in the I don't know what you call them, like the pillars maybe, where everybody's sitting down. And then he sees a woman all in black appear. She just kind of goes up from underneath, and she appears behind the pillars, and then as the camera looks at him and then goes back, she gets closer and closer until she's there, kind of with her hands around the shoulders of his son. And he's kind of freaking out, and he's trying to, focus on his little sermon there, and that's where that ends, I believe. Yes, and then he cuts over to him talking to his son, and he's putting him to bed, and he's like, I want you to spend more time with your grandma. And then this part right here jumps very quickly, very, very quickly. It's scene after scene after scene. So after he tucks in his son into the bed, he's like, I want you to spend time with your grandma. He's driving with, I believe, his wife in a car. And then the wife sees a woman in front of him, and it's that same woman from earlier who had her hands around the shoulders of the son. And there's Samuel L. Jackson's character, Minister Garth, and he's driving fast, and he's trying to, I guess, scare that woman because he's seen her before, but he pulls away last second, and the car flips, and then it shows a scene of him dead, and then it cuts again, and that's where Joel, we get our first introduction to adult Joel, and he wakes up from his nightmare.
So yeah, we end up getting adult Joel, and he's there with his grandma, and the grandma's essentially telling him that, he's going to follow like in his dad's footsteps and be a minister. And we see the lady from the car accident that ultimately caused the car accident there, and she ends up attending the funeral and placing some flowers down. After that, the scene jumps pretty quickly over to the bar where the woman who was seen from the very first scene that seduced that guy and killed him, she's there, and a man comes, and he's like, this part's actually pretty funny. It's considered a comedy horror film. He's offers to buy her a drink, and she says like, oh, well, I like champagne. And so she asked the bartender, like, do you have this type of champagne? And we see the guy like basically telling the bartender, like doing like a whisper, like, say no, because it's probably super expensive. And so the bartender's like, no. And she's like, well, do you have this? And then the guy's like doing his head like, no, say no. And then he keeps saying it, and then finally the guy jumps in. He's like, do you have like blah blah blah, which you can assume, I don't know anything about champagne, but you can assume it's like probably some like bottom of the barrel cheap champagne. So they're talking back and forth, and she asks him his name, and he lies and tells her this really like fancy name, and she's like, oh, well, you look more like a Norman. And he immediately is like, what? Like he's all like taken back by it. And she decides she's done playing around, so she just straight up says, look, do you want to come back to my place? And she's like very upfront.
Yeah, it seems like she does that quite often. One thing I did want to point out also was when that guy, I guess Norman is his name, walks into the bar, he's shown taking off his marriage ring, his wedding ring, and hiding that before he goes and talks to this temptress. But they get back to her place. They start doing the business. It's towards the end of it, and she has him kind of tied up, and she's playing with him with his feather, and then she pulls out a knife and she starts like cutting him up, and she starts bleeding. And at first he seems kind of into it, and then a little bit he just kind of gives a little feedback, but then gives in again. But then it cuts over to Joel, and he's having another nightmare about the woman in black, and he's seeing her in his dreams. And then it cuts to him calling his childhood friend Kay, and they're going back and forth talking about how Joel wants to go to New York. He's a little unsure about whether he wants to pursue this career in ministry and becoming a minister. So he's discussing that. He's like, I want to come to New York just to get a little break for a while and then come back and finish my schooling. And then the married man, it cuts back to the married man and the temptress in her bed.
Yeah, so the married man, he gets up, and the camera is very like wide, so you can't really see him. You just see the outline of him, and he gets out of her bed and he goes up to the mirror, and he's like, how am I supposed to go home like this? Like, what did you do to me? And we get a quick camera shown at him as he pulls away, or as he's like putting on his shirt or whatever it is he has on, a blazer. And you can see all these cuts just all on his body. And that's when the lady says like, oh, well, you're in for much, basically like, you're in for much more. Like, you're going to have to deal with your wife later, and breakfast is already made for you. And she's like laughing the whole time. And we get this guy who says like, I just thought I was going to be able to do this and leave. Like, he's kind of realizing his mistake that he made. And as the temptress is talking, she has these quick little like spats where her voice gets really, really deep, and she kind of has this evil like, you know, the mwahaha kind of laugh a little bit. But it's so odd to me in the movie though, because the guy doesn't notice. Like, if you're with a girl and she's like talking normal, and then out of nowhere she talks like this, wouldn't you kind of be like, yo, what happened to your voice? Like, but the dude doesn't think nothing of it, and he goes, he's like walking downstairs, and you could still hear like her evil laugh in the background, and he's like freaking out. He's just like screaming. Like, it's a pretty crazy scene. Like, I actually enjoyed like this part of the movie.
Yeah, it definitely is. I heard her say, the one thing that stood out to me is she says that she gave him something that there's no cure for, and he's gonna have to deal with it later. And that's referring to the cuts. So he's at the bottom of the stairs. He stops to tie his shoe, and he looks in the mirror again, and his face and his like neck area, his veins are really starting to like pop out of his skin, and they're starting to turn this ugly color, and he starts to scream because he's very worried about what's going to happen to him. And of course that refers to that thing that she gave him that there's no cure for. So then after we get that scene, so before all this happens, before we even get that scene of temptress cutting up this married man, we actually were introduced to who we find out later in this film is Dougie, and he's talking and flirting with these couple of ladies, saying he's a surgeon, and that he's also working on this kung fu movie, and he's hitting on both of them at the same time, saying he wants to do this, or he's like this surgeon for kung fu stars, and you know, just trying to pick them up. So then it gets back after we get this guy looking in the mirror and freaking out and seeing what she's done to him. We actually get Joel, and he starts packing, and he like leaves his Bible. He's like, I don't want to leave this here. He looks out the window, and he sees this woman in black out in the rain. So it really just kind of looks like the woman in black, but it also could be in his head. That's what I kind of read more about it. It was just really all in his head, and this like demon was like sending, I guess, these flashes into his mind to believe that he's seeing things.
Yeah, it's because we end up finding out later, these are kind of the first little instances where this demon that ends up being temptress, she's able to manipulate people's minds and get into people's heads and know what people are thinking. And she seems to be kind of the one that is maybe leading Joel on this route of like wanting to go to New York to go see Kay, because it's very much outside of his character from what we know so far. But we end up going back to the bar. A lot of these scenes happen at this one particular bar, and the scene at the bar shows the guy Dougie, who used that kung fu surgeon line earlier, and he's talking to the bartender, and he's like, "Oh, you see that girl over there?" And then the bartender's like, "Oh yeah, of course. How can I not?" And he's like, "Yeah, she's real bad, blah 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 blah, but just something ain't right about her." And the bartender's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, I don't know, it's just something doesn't sit right with me about her." And he mentions about how like there was like, "Oh yeah, my buddy, he who would come to this bar, he ended up picking her up. He went out with her on a date. I haven't heard about the date. I haven't seen him since." And the bartender's kind of like, "Oh, that's weird." And then we hear the temptress call over the bartender. She's like, "Bartender," and then calls him over there to, of course, I'm guessing, to give her a drink. But in my mind, I saw it as she knew that they were talking about each other, and there was kind of that hint of like, oh, she's suspicious, what's going on with her? And so she immediately took the bartender's mind off of it and stopped him, so that way that kind of suspicion goes away.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as well. I mean, she's definitely a character and knows quite a bit, even when that people are talking about her and stuff. But then it cuts over to Joel, and he's on the bus, and he's looking out the window, and you can hear his voice, and it's him reading a letter that he left his grandma about how he needed to get away and he needed to experience New York and just kind of get away from his studies for a little bit. And then from there, we go back to the bar. The bar is a very popular setting in this movie, so we're back in the bar, and the temptress is approached by this guy, a very wealthy-looking man, and he's flirting with her, and she's doing that usual thing where she flirts back and just kind of leads to inviting him home, but she doesn't get there because she looks at the door, and in walks Kay, and she stops and she kind of packs up her things, and she gives this guy that she was talking to like a card or a number, and just kind of goes over to a booth and sits down and just stares at Kay until she catches his attention. And as soon as she does, Kay's like, "Oh," and he goes over to the booth, and he's like, "Is this seat taken? Can I sit with you?" And of course they start flirting and stuff, and we find out that Kay is actually a movie star, and this is kind of how she's recognized him. Of course there's other reasons why she wants to talk to him and so forth, but he's offering to sign an autograph for her. And this part right here was a little so he's writing the autograph, and he's making it out to who she says, which is James. And while he's doing that, looking down, her eyes become so menacing and evil, and her expressions completely change. But when he looks back up, she becomes more of that bubbly character, trying to flirt with him again. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was a little weird because I wonder why she got that look on him particularly, because she didn't, from the guys that she talked to earlier in the movie, she didn't have that look with them. She was always that nice bubbly kind of look until it came time to do her business that she does at the end. But so that was a little weird. But after the whole autograph scene, it's pretty funny. You end up getting this like next scene where they're dancing, and there's like a jazz musician in the background, and they're kissing, and then we have Kay lying in bed, and she's feeding him grapes and a banana, like if he's like some type of king or something. And she like basically like not literally slaps him, but like wakes him up because he was daydreaming the whole time. And she says like like, "Oh, like let's take this back to my place." And we get Kay actually being like the really good friend, and even though he's like fully like not all about this woman, he says like, "Oh, I can't, like I got my buddy coming into town, like I gotta be a good brother to him, and go pick him up, make sure he tuck him in at night." And she seems a little annoyed by it, but Kay says like, "Oh, you got my number, I got your number, like we'll keep in touch. And so we see Kay get up, and then he turns around because he's like, oh, I didn't get your name, and she's gone, just vanished.
Yeah, so she vanishes, and then it cuts to Joel waiting there outside of Kay's apartment. And he doesn't seem annoyed, doesn't seem angry. Of course, he's that minister, so he keeps that positive attitude. And as soon as he sees Joel kind of, Kay, like, walking up to that apartment, he perks up and he's excited. And Kay immediately just kind of runs by him and goes to his door. And Joel kind of pops up behind him and scares him a little bit. I thought this was really funny because Kay's character says, I don't know if this was like an actor's fault or not, but he almost says the F word, but he corrects himself. He's like, I almost messed you up, man. So I thought that was a very interesting little thing there. I don't know if it was an actor's mistake or if that was actually part of the script, but they kept that in there. So they're catching up upstairs, and another thing that I thought was pretty interesting about this movie is Joel recognizing this gun that Kay used in the movie, and Kay's describing like, oh, I take it to the range sometime. I only keep it around and keep it loaded because, you know, the real world can get tough out here. You have no idea. You're just a minister kind of thing. You know, you trying to put on this front. But that gun literally never comes up. You know, it does it eventually, but it has really no relevance towards the movie, and they spend pretty decent time like describing why this gun is so important.
Well, I mean, like you kind of said, like towards at the end, we get like it does. I feel like it does have an importance.
I don't know. I didn't see it as that much of an importance because I mean it wasn't that relevant to that scene, anyways.
Well, to that scene, I guess my thought process behind it is like Kay used to live in the same like small town that Joel did. He moved to New York, and he kind of became, I guess, like this other person, right? Maybe that's who he was deep down, but he became this other dude. He's wearing like, Jordans and like all this other kind of stuff. He's rocking Jordans in the film, some pretty expensive Jordans. And like, he's wearing nice clothes. The way he talks is even different. And this is the other thing. I don't know if you caught this, but throughout the film, there's certain times in the beginning when him and Joel are first interacting that he's going to cuss or say something certain, and he stops himself because he knows that Joel doesn't curse because he's like, a goody good. He's a minister and stuff. So that's how come he caught himself at that point when he was going to say like the F word. He was like, messed you up. Because I know there's at least 2 or 3 other parts early on where he's going to curse, but then he like stops himself, or either he curses and then he says like sorry and then he corrects himself.
Okay, I didn't really catch on to that. That would definitely make sense as to why he corrected himself when he got scared. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It could be definitely that he's like this new person in New York. He has to carry a gun because he's this, crazy New York man. He got to defend himself and show that he's tough now and isn't just this small-time minister that, we end up finding, after they talk about the gun, they're catching up a little bit more, and Joel kind of brings up the old ministry days, and Kay's like, oh, I don't even remember that happened so long ago. So we end up finding that he used to be in that ministry school as well.
Yeah, he talks about that, and he just mentions about like, oh yeah, I had to come to New York and be myself, and all of that kind of stuff that we had mentioned a little bit already. But then the next scene that we end up having, and I'm just going through my notes here, people, a little behind the scenes. We end up getting where he starts describing this girl that he met at the bar, and he's saying like, oh, I know, I feel like she could be someone that like I could see myself with. She's nice, she's this, she's beautiful, she's that, she's so innocent. And like as he's mentioning each of these terms, the scene is cutting like back to that woman at the from the bar, the temptress, and she's with another man who we did see earlier on, who she was like briefly talking to, but he just didn't seem really that important. And now we find out he was really just used for the scene. Where like when she says like, or when Kay says, "Oh, she's so nice," it cuts to her slamming the door on the dude. And then when he says like, "Oh, she's so innocent," it cuts to like her and that dude like having sex, and her like getting frustrated with him, and him saying like, "Oh, is everything okay?" And she's like, "Don't kiss me." And so it's just like this back and forth kind of thing. And there's one shot that is where we get that the temptress may not be a real person, because the way the camera is, it's only showing about a corner piece of the bed, and we see the guy's arm there, and we see just this huge furry like beast like hand for just a second, and then the beast attacks the man and there's blood everywhere, so you assume the man died.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty good little death scene there. Like, it's covered by these curtains, and you kind of just get the shadow, and she's digging into him. You see her arms just going up and down, like really digging into him. There's blood splattering everywhere. So I thought that was a really good like horror scene for this movie. So then it cuts back to Joel and Kay, and they're talking again, and they plan on going to a bar, and Kay's kind of convincing Joel because he wants to meet up with this woman again that he's been talking about, and he's convincing him to go to the bar. And this is where we learn that Joel doesn't drink, that he wants to just get a glass of milk and just kind of treat it like one of those sliding bar scenes where the bartender slides a big old glass of beer down the bar towards you. That's kind of like his little fantasy there. And then it cuts to this really cute like friendship changing scene where Kay's laying on the bed and Joel tries on a bunch of different outfits for him, and he's like, "Nope, not that one, give me another one. Nope, not that one, give me another one." And Joel's got some pretty fire fits throughout. I think so. I think he's got some pretty fire fits. You don't think so? I think so. I mean, this is the 90s, man. There's pretty fire fits for the 90s. If you think about eras, he's classing it up with them Jordans and stuff. I think so.
Nah, man,
Come on, man.
That boy Joel, his fits was ass. He don't know how to dress, man. Like, see, Kay dressed slick. He was rocking Jordans. He was rocking the OG Nike Air Jordans, I want to say, in a scene in the film, and like he had a nice fit with it, where it was like he had, I guess, like a little bit of swag to him, but he was still like everything. It just fit right for him. But I don't know if it's just because of the way that the movie portrays Joel, but when you think of his character, some of those fits he had, it just made him look even dorkier than it was. It was like, it's just like a scene from a family movie where it's like the dad and he's like trying to be hip for the kids. Like, what are you doing, bro? I'm
a dad at heart, dude. That's why I think those fits are pretty good, man.
Oh, my dude, I guess I got a little bit more swag than you, man. I don't know.
Oh yeah, okay, sure. We'll get to that later. We'll get to that one later. Anyways, after that changing scene is done, we're at the bar, and Joel's going up to Kay, and he's saying that he's met someone, and Kay's already, "Dude, it's been like 2 minutes. I left you for 2 minutes. How did you meet someone already?" And Joel's waving over this woman, and we find out it's the temptress. And she comes over, and she's already clinging on to Joel, and she acts like she's never met Kay before. And this is literally the woman that Kay had been describing up in his apartment, like the one that he had been falling for and could see a life with. And he's very spiteful. He's like, "Nah, just stop playing with me. But then Joel and Temptress go off, and they just kind of go at the bar, and you see this kind of drink that's put in front of Joel, and he's drinking it, and you assume that he's drinking alcohol. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. We learned later that it wasn't, but it was a good little kind of thing. Like, he was breaking the rules for this woman. He really was lusting after her.
Yeah, it was. We get that side of Joel that we haven't seen. We all know that he's, on the path to be a minister like his father and everything, and it just was completely out of his character. And as a viewer, you're kind of like, oh well, like, it's crazy that obviously it's the same girl that the brother was talking about, but you're not surprised because Joel had kind of dedicated his life to the ministry and everything, so he hasn't, I guess, had that type of interaction with a woman before. So obviously, as like a, I guess, like a male and puberty and whatnot, of course Joel would be very excited that like an attractive woman took such interest in him. But the next scene goes to the apartment where obviously the brother is pissed and they're talking, and he's just like, so he basically says like, so thought you weren't gonna drink, thought you were gonna have milk, that wasn't milk. And Joel's like, it wasn't milk, but it wasn't alcohol either. And so they're like, so then the brother's asking him kind of questions like, if you meet a girl and she's gonna want to like, essentially like, if she was gonna want to have sex with you, are you gonna do it? And Joel's like, of course not. I can't believe you'd ask me that. Like, fornication is wrong. Like, what path I'm going down, all this kind of stuff. And that's when that's essentially when they end up making up. But Kay doesn't tell Joel that the girl he was talking about is that same girl yet. So Joel's still uninformed.
Yeah, so Joel doesn't know, and then it cuts over and we get his grandma, and she has a picture of Joel, kind of like a kid picture of Joel, and she's praying over him because she finds the letter, and she now knows that he's in New York, and she's just praying over him, wishing that he's being very safe and that he doesn't get into any trouble. But then it cuts over to the temptress, and she's got this snake, and she's being evil, and she's also kind of thinking of Joel and saying that she wants to get rid of him and kind of end this bloodline because he's the last of his kind in this bloodline. And we don't really get more information than that, but you see blood start coming, kind of like tears coming from her eyes, and then it cuts over to the grandma, and she sees that same thing on the picture of Joel where there's blood coming down from his eyes in that picture, and she starts freaking out, and then that immediately goes away. And then we get the temptress, and she goes to Kay's apartment to pick up Joel, and then this is where Kay confronts her about what had happened.
Yeah, we get a whole side of Kay that we haven't seen before. He's like cursing. He's very New Yorker in this, if you will. And he's like cursing at her, saying like, what is up? Like, we had a thing. You know who I am. All this kind of stuff. And she's basically says, what does she end up saying? She says something like, I can't remember what she says. She says something because she doesn't say nothing because as Joel's going back and forth, he looks into the mirror and he's like looking back and forth from the mirror to her. And that's when we realize her reflection doesn't show in the mirror, which explains why in the very beginning she had all the mirrors covered in her room. And we get the temptress. She gets that like evil demonic look on her again, and she tells Joel something, she tells Kay something, and then Joel comes and she immediately goes from being all like demonic and stuff to just like happy, like okay Joel, like we'll be back soon, Kay, like all happy. And Joel just doesn't think anything of it because he wasn't there for it, but yet Kay's looking all like he's so in shock that he can't process what he just saw, so he can't tell Joel like, wait Joel, like don't go, she's crazy. So Joel and the temptress leave.
Yeah, so you get that in case of freaking out there at the apartment, and then he goes and he's rushing. You see Dougie at the bar, and he's like trying these hypothetical pickup lines there. I forgot what does he say? What was one?
Oh, I got it. The pickup lines are clean, my man. So the camera is like face, so it looks like he's talking to someone, but you're getting like a POV type shot of just his face, and he's like, baby, you got a nuclear booty.
If you need a movie for good pickup lines, just go watch this one. This is probably the only thing this is good for, to be honest.
Exactly. So you gotta write down. You gotta make sure all the fellas out there. You tell your ladies. You tell your girlfriends this too. Tell them you're a kung fu surgeon. You tell them you're a race car driver, and you tell them most importantly that they got a nuclear booty.
There you go. Pickup lines with the Gruesome Task. Um,
That's a shirt.
So there we go. We're making a shirt for that. So we get Dougie at the bar. Kay comes in, rushing in. He's freaking out, and he starts telling him about how he didn't see a reflection for Temptress, about how Dougie had actually warned him like the night before, after Kay saw Joel and Temptress, grabbing a drink together. Dougie had came up to him. He's like, "That girl is bad news. I don't trust her." So now Kay's coming back to him the next day at the bar, and he's telling him about how he didn't see the reflection, that something weird is going on. And then this is where we learn that Dougie is actually part of the police force, and he's been trying to track down the source of all these murders, that these older men are just kind of dying so randomly, so weirdly. And how there was this one story, he was saying he was in the hospital, and this one guy actually had snakes inside of his stomach, that so it's just random, and it never happened before, and he was still trying to get to the bottom of it. And that he had gone to the bar every night to kind of watch the Temptress, because he had been noticing that she would take men home and never return. He would never see those men again.
Yeah. I just find it so crazy that this like funny dude in the movie ends up being like a private investigator. I
Yeah.
did not think that in a million years. But we end up getting where they go to that, like, I don't want to call them, what are they called? Like a psychic palm reader type person. I mean, someone that knows about all this like weird stuff.
Yeah, they call her the Great Madame Sonia.
Okay, yes, the Great Madame Sonia, played by Melba Moore. They go see her, and they tell her of what's going on with this lady, and does she know anything? And the psychic person ends up saying like, well, yes, I've heard about these demons. They prey on the weak, and they use that kind of like submissive nature to bring in their victims. And the reason she wants Joel is because he's essentially like the ultimate, if you like, the ultimate like good person, right? He doesn't have those kind of thoughts that a lot of these other men that she's had killed earlier in the film have and stuff. And also he's the last in his family tree. And so the psychic person then says her name is Temptation, or Temptress, Temptation, whatever it is. Yeah, it's Temptation. And so as soon as she says that, while this is going on, I should mention the scenes cut so quickly, it's kind of, you forget sometimes, but while they were there with the Madame Sonia, Joel and the Temptation were out on a date. And while they're there on the date, the Temptation, she's like mentioning like, oh, I know that you're wanting to become like a minister, like that's so great and all this stuff. And Joel's like, yeah, I'm passionate about it, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, wait a minute, how did you know that? I never brought that up to you. And she comes up with a quick lie about how, oh, you just give off that aura that a minister does. And I've met others in the past that, you had similar, you're similar to. And Joel doesn't really think of anything of it. But when the Madame Sonia says Temptation's name, her Temptation is back on the date, and she starts getting like, she can sense that her name was said, and that she's being found out essentially. So she starts feeling real ill, and she's like, I'll be right back.
Yeah, so she goes in, and then it cuts back to the Madame Sonia. And of course, she's still going on about how this demon is evil, and she really just wants to steal that purity from Joel. But Temptation actually possesses Madame Sonia, and she starts saying like, I know what you're doing, you can't run away from me, I know exactly what's going on. And Kay like gets really, really scared and just books it. Like, he's like, I'm gone, and he just runs off, and Dougie stays for a little bit, and he just looks at it, just possessed now Madame Sonia, and then he leaves. And then it cuts to Grandma actually having nightmares and dreams, and it's of Joel being in trouble and this woman in black. And so Joel, in this dream, Joel walks into that same bar, and this woman in black is surrounded by all these victims that she's She's already taking care of all these older men. They're like missing flesh, and they're trying to get Joel to, be a part of them, kind of succumb to this. And this woman in black goes up to Joel and kind of kisses him and, plays with his lips and so forth. And this is where Grandma wakes up.
Yeah, she wakes up and she can realize that Joel is in trouble and that she ultimately is going to need to do something to try and save him. We then get where Joel is back home, and Kay comes home and he tells Joel, like, hey, look, like, that girl that you've been going to date, well, that's the girl that I was describing, and this is what's going on with her. Like, she's crazy. You need to stop seeing her now, blah, blah, blah. And Joel just doesn't seem to really believe it. Obviously, it's kind of crazy coming from him. But the way that I feel like the way that Kay describes it, because he probably realizes that Joel's not going to believe if he says, like, oh, this is like this demon who's possessing people. The way he says it is like, oh, remember, you're here in like New York, like I feel like I need to protect you. You just need to be careful of these girls. Like, he tries to kind of transition it that way. And he gets to the point where Joel's not really believing him. Joel kind of thinks that maybe Kay's just jealous. And so Joel thinks that Kay's jealous. I don't know why it sounded weird. And then Kay tells him, well, you do what you want then. You, like, if you're not going to listen to me, like, you go back to your small town where you came from, and I got, like, me and Dougie, like, Dougie's out in the car, we got to take care of something.
Yeah, so then it cuts to them and they go to the bar. And outside this bar is that bartender, and they kind of convince him to put holy water into Temptation's drink. So he agrees, and he cuts inside. He kind of secretly does it, but it's very obvious. I mean, like, he pulls it out of his pocket and everything, and it's very obvious. But it seems like she's naive about it, so she doesn't realize what's really going on. She drinks it, and Kay and Dougie are waiting outside the bar for her to drink it, and Dougie's like, oh, she's gonna start farting and spitting up all this stuff when she drinks that water, so you gotta be prepared. So then she does it, and she's on the floor. She's like having this weird seizure kind of moment, and they go inside and they try to Dougie gets on top of her and he tries to thrust a knife into her, but I want to believe that she didn't really drink that, and her powers were still very much intact, so she stops that knife thrust midway, and she turns that knife towards Dougie, and Kay's there. He grabs the knife, and they're trying to pull it off and away from Dougie so that he doesn't get stabbed, and they manage to escape that. And there's Temptation on the floor being crazy demon-like, and she's sticking her tongue out, going back and forth, and she's being that demon. This is the first time that we get to see that from her.
Yeah, it was a cool scene to really see. I wondered, like, where the bartender was at this point, because they had told the bartender beforehand, like, you need to get out of there once she drinks that. But when he gives her the drink, it doesn't really show him, like, leave. But we end up finding out later what happens to him. But he, after this, and when Dougie and Kay, they run out of the bar, and Kay's vehicle's gone, and they're like, where's my vehicle? And Dougie's like, dude, we got to get out of here. And Kay's saying, like, I'm not getting out of here. Like, that's my vehicle. Like, it's gone. So he's like, I want to go this way. And Dougie goes, no, I want to go that way. They say, well, we'll get back to each other. So they split up. One goes left, one goes right. And we end up following Dougie. The camera does. And Dougie goes down this street. He's like running, and he sees this vehicle that turns the corner, and the headlights beam at him. So he thinks, like, oh, this is like someone coming to get him. So he starts running, and he hails down a car, and he does the whole, like, I'm police, open up. So he gets in the back seat, and who's in the front seat? A, like, demon version of the bartender, which is crazy. And then it cuts over to the back seat again, and next to him is like this weird, crazy looking demon, and they just attack Dougie.
Yeah, I just thought this was really interesting because we get a lot of different versions of this demon. Like earlier in the movie, you get to see this beast type hand, and now we see like this. It looked like almost an alien type thing. It had the red eyes, and it looked like it had almost lizard type skin. So I thought that was really interesting. We get to see that little change up there. I don't know if it's just not continuous or it was meant to be that way. Um, so yeah, after that we get Kay going back to his apartment. He's very cautious, walking in. He's, you know, making sure that everything's clear, the coast is clear. He goes home, and then it cuts to Joel at Temptation's house, and he's being seduced, and he, you know, she's kissing up on him, and he's kind of pulling him away and not really trying to give into that. And she's like, well, have a glass of wine, that'll help you relax. And he's like, well, I don't really want that. But then she drinks it and kind of kisses him like right away, and she ends up drugging him and he passes out. But then it cuts back to Kay, and he's in his kitchen, and he hears the TV go off, and he grabs a knife, and he goes into the living room, and this is where he sees himself with that gun, if you want to take that away, since you thought the gun was a little more important than I did.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I just thought it was important because he sees himself in the TV with the gun, and in the little like video footage, he's like touting the gun, like trying to be cool, and it just kind of goes back to really from the beginning of the film when he says like, you know, like, oh, and I just had to like be myself, and like New York is different than where I was before, and based off all these things that Kay says in this video, he's showing off this gun. He thinks he's like, I guess if you want to say, like, he thinks he's big shit, right? Like he's like pointing it, he's making like all these sounds, talking all hard and everything, and it's very resemblant to like how some like modern dudes are. Like they have this gun trying to be hard on Instagram Live, and they're like showing it off and stuff. And it's just this other side of Kay that I'm sure like deep down isn't really him. And I think because this video or whatever was playing on the TV, that attracted him closer towards the TV, because obviously he's like just entranced by it. He goes up to the TV, but it's weird because the camera like on the or the whatever video is on the TV, it like zoomed into his mouth, and so he's like going closer and closer at it. And as he goes closer, the mouth jumps out of the TV and bites him, and then just like eats him. He gets eaten by the TV.
Yeah, I think this is my favorite part about this movie. Definitely the favorite kill for sure. Yeah, this mouth just opens up and he gets sucked in by this screen, and it's just chomping away at you, chomping away at him. You see the last bit of his Jordans, just his shoes, and it just sucks him right in. Another creepy thing that I thought was a little bit creepy about this part is there's this Ronald Reagan statue on top of the TV set, and this comes to life as well, and it's like laughing at the same time while Kay's being eaten. And then once he gets sucked into the TV, you see like his lips lick it, and you know, get that satisfactory feeling. And then after that, you get this spew of blood gushing out of the TV and just goes all over the floor. Definitely my favorite kill for sure. I really enjoyed that scene.
Yeah, that was a really nice kill scene. It's the most enjoyable one that we've had so far, and really just the most like odd one. I know I mentioned a little earlier this is considered a horror comedy, and it's you know, based off how it was, like it is very comedic, but it was so cool that it is kind of scary a little bit at the same time. But as this happens, unfortunately, Kay died, which sucks because I really liked his character for the most part. And it jumps back to where we get Joel, and he wakes up in a bed, but it's not the temptress's bed. It's he's laying in like his childhood bed, and he kind of wakes up and he looks over at the temptress next to him, and we get Samuel Jackson's character, the Minister Garth, who's Joel's father, comes in, and he's saying like, I'm gonna teach you a lesson, like you're fornicating in my house and all this kind of stuff. And Joel's telling him like, you're dead, you're not real, you're not real. And as this happens, it cuts back to like a modern time where it's the Temptress's bed and the Temptress is on top of Joel, and she's basically trying to, kill him or whatever. And that's when Joel's grandma runs through the door, which is so crazy because this is all like wild to me. Okay, so let's peel it back a little bit. Obviously the grandma, she's like can sense these wrongdoings. She seems to have this like attachment to God or whatever, right? But yet she just like knows where the Temptress lives. Like I guess in the movie we can assume that like because she has this like huge attachment and she's super religious that like it led her there. But I just thought that was a little like unrealistic. Like when the grandma walked through, I kind of laughed. It's like the grandma breaks through and she's like obviously makes her entrance very pronounced. So the Temptress just like does like a wave of her hand and the power force from her hand or whatever. The grandma just slangs across like she got straight up like Von Miller tackled into the wall basically with the power of the force. And
yeah, I definitely agree with. Yeah, I just wanted to agree with you with that grandma part where, I mean, it's definitely unrealistic. There's no way she would have known where this Temptress lives at all. And then right away, she just gets flung against the wall with just a wave of a hand, like we're in Star Wars or something, like just woof, and she just, gets pushed back. I thought that was pretty funny as well. I definitely couldn't help but laugh.
yeah, and the next part's pretty funny too. Like the Temptress at this point, she gave 0 Fs, man. So then when like the grandma gets flung, the I don't know, I was gonna call him Jimmy, Joel, he like tries to he's like no, and he tries to like grab on the Temptress, and the Temptress straight up snaps my man's wrist into like a million pieces. Like
yeah, it was definitely the camera was focused on it, and she just like snaps the bone, and you see like the bone snapped in half, and this coming out of the flesh, and he's like, I mean, if that happened to me, I would freak out a lot more than my buddy Joel did. He just took that he took that like a champ, and of course he was in pain, but at the same time he was still fighting off the Temptress. But he gets up off to his feet, the Temptress is off of hers, she throws him into the other corner. She's got grandma in one corner, Joel in one corner, and this is where she becomes this full demon. And it's something different than what was shown before. Like, you don't get that same kind of lizard skin as was shown in the car. You see more of like these eye holes, and her eyes are just completely dark and black inside. Very creepy, but not necessarily creepy. It just looks like she's missing eyes for me. Like, there's not much that the makeup, or not much that makeup was put into this part of the scene.
yeah, it's it was we're winding down pretty much at the very end of the film here, but I agree with you on the makeup thing. There wasn't really much. I felt they could have added a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you get these different, I guess, versions of this demon from before, and I think that the car one was definitely more noticeable. I mean, they really focused on that as well, but maybe they just used like a machine animatronic or something, and they just couldn't transfer that over to like a living actor, and they couldn't put that on, so they had to do something completely different. Or I mean, the budget was pretty low too, so maybe they just ran out of money at the end. But it was definitely something to look at, and it just didn't sit right as the final scene for this demon. In my opinion, they could have done a bit more.
Yeah, 100% agree. And we got Joel. He ends up crawling over to the. I will say, for all my wrestling heads out there, will get this. My boy Joel sold the heck out of his broken wrist, because we get him like crawling to this cross as he's going towards it, and he doesn't use that broken wrist at all. Like he actually like is using the other hand to try and crawl. He's like making sure when he kind of rolls off the bed, he makes sure like not to land on that wrist. He did a great job. Shout out to my man Joel. But he grabs a cross and he holds it up to the demon, and he says like, "This is between me and you," And the demon turns around and immediately, the power of the cross, was it the power of Christ compels you? She ends up getting, she ends up getting basically burnt to smithereens, and she just explodes. And as she's exploding, this is where we get this like really ugly, just like, it basically looked like if you took like burnt food or something and just left it on the floor. That's how her body looked after it was all burnt up, and she dies. And we then end up getting, which I would say is probably the coolest scene. And I don't know if this was meant to signal a sequel, but we end up getting Kay, who's driving a vehicle, and this man gets out, but you can't see who the man is. And Kay obviously doesn't, like, you could tell it's him, but he looks kind of a little like demonized. And it cuts to the bar, and it shows like a woman, and it goes like up her legs, and she has a light, and she's lighting a cigarette, and it cuts over to the who has a cigarette, and it's Dougie. And he's in the bar, and this girl's very, very attracted to him. So us as the viewer, we now know that he's essentially like the new temptress.
Yeah, and that line comes back again after she lights his cigarette for him. She uses a match, and he says, "You should use a cigarette lighter next time. The flame lasts longer." So that line comes back around full circle. And then after that, we get Joe's figure running through the fog again that we see in all the nightmare scenes. And over this, he's talking about how his life is filled with winding crossroads, and he can almost say for sure that we'll meet again. And that's really referring to this demon again, how that he expects this demon to come back and try to ruin his purity, and things like that. So he definitely sees that coming again. It's definitely set up for a sequel, but it just didn't happen. And that's the end of the movie.
Which I can say, thank you to the director James Bond III for not doing a sequel, because nobody needed a sequel. Nobody needed to see this first movie. This movie was ass. This movie was ass!
Yeah, I definitely agree. Oh my gosh, it was so hard to sit through. James Bond III should have stuck to the writing, directing, and producing part of this movie, because him as Joel, sure, he sold that little last bit, the wrist thing, but the rest of his acting was, oh my gosh, it was not good. It was not good. I never once believed he sold that character at all.
Okay, so I actually disagree with you. I think his acting was fine. My problem with it is I just think that I think the reason behind the story is very good, but I think the story they told was bad. And I know it was from 1990, so it's more than likely filmed the year or two before. However, we've seen plenty of movies from the 90s. We've reviewed a couple movies from the freaking 70s on here, the 60s, and they're done better than this. I mean, I think that the whole story of, hey, you have this demon that's a figure supposed to be, like you say, quote, actual temptation. Obviously her name is Temptation, right? People have these temptations, they go through their life, and you need to remain pure. These other dudes gave into it, which led to their death, and Joel was the one who didn't, so he stayed alive. Cool. But have a better story for the movie. Like, the actors did the best job they could, because this script was garbage. Certified, bona fide, real deal Holyfield garbage. I cannot believe that they spent $54,000 on this. This is how much this movie took to be made. And they made $2 million. Who's going to the theater to see this? I guarantee you, if I haven't seen the trailer, but I guarantee if I look at the trailer, I'm gonna watch it and be like, I'm good. I'd rather watch the Teletubbies movie. This movie is trash.
All right, I'm gonna let you go first as the rating because I do definitely agree with you, but I feel like you give me quite a few reasons here. So go ahead and give your rating for this movie, sir.
I'm not even gonna build suspense. This movie, this is a 2 pints of blood out of 10. This is a lowish rating. I've been very generous. I feel like throughout the season, I've typically given higher scores than Jose, but this movie, garbage. It deserves 2 out of 10, and the only reason it deserves 2 out of 10 stars is because my man Dougie had the fire pickup lines. If he did not have those pickup lines in this movie, if he did not say that girl had a nuclear booty, then this movie would have been 0 pints of blood. I would have had an empty glass, my friend.
Oh, come on. You could have given it some points for the killing scenes. I think the killings were the saving grace for this film, in my opinion. The inconsistencies as far as the actual demon, I don't agree with at all. But I do think that the killings were the saving grace. I could have done without Dougie's nuclear booty comments over here, but I mean, honestly, I honestly could have. It didn't feel relevant to the story at all whatsoever. Sure, it's a horror comedy. I get that. You gotta add the comedy in there. That's fine, but I mean, there were other parts that could have been funny. You know, the conversation scenes between Kay and Joel, like, those were completely irrelevant. There was no point, you know, of them catching up so much. In my opinion, like, that gun scene just still seemed irrelevant for me. Because the whole time, Kay's just trying to prove what a badass he is to Joel. Like, why was that necessary? Just catch up, be friends. I get it. That's fine. I don't know. There's a lot of inconsistencies throughout the film, and a lot of things that should have been left out. And I don't know. I mean, I just think the only good parts from this were the killings, and not necessarily the one at the end either, because I was just holding a cross to a demon and them exploding. Maybe that's where most of the budget went, that they couldn't freaking make some crazy demon at the end, you know? There's a lot that I definitely did not like about this movie. So, all in all, I'm gonna go ahead and agree with you. I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 10, sir, and that's only because I like 2 killings in this movie. And that's about it.
I just like to let everybody know who's still listening at this point. Unless someone requests that I watch this movie with them, I will never watch this movie again. I will not buy this movie. I will not put this movie on my shelf. I will not type this movie that I own it in my spreadsheet. The only record that people have that ever watched this movie is because of this podcast. This movie was trash, man. It's so bad. And see, we thought Ganja and Hess was bad. Ganja and Hess is a better movie than this.
I think Ganja and Hess was like average. I think if I remember correct, I give it like a 5 something. But yeah, this is just it's not good. It really isn't. And sure, I'd recommend, you know, give it a good watch once. You know, I really don't recommend doing that, but if you feel the need to do it, go ahead. But I'm just going to refer you to this podcast because we just described the whole movie and the best parts about it, and that's pretty much all you need to know. So we're almost like an hour 15 here. Just spend an hour 15 instead of the hour 35 that you're going to waste watching this movie.
Exactly. You know, Death by Temptation, your ass. Let's wrap it up, Jose. Give me some fun facts. Give me something good, please.
Well, I already spoiled some of it at the beginning. So, Kadeem Hardison, Samuel L. Jackson, Bill Nunn, and I forgot the actress who played the grandma. But they were all in. You have that name for it?
Minnie Gentry.
Minnie Gentry. Thank you, sir. They were all in Spike Lee's School Days to 2 years prior. So, I mean, this cast was obviously in something better, and they had something better to work with, and that movie was successful. I mean, no really harsh compliments to James Bond whatsoever. Cool name. But you need to come up with some better movies. They're doing everything by yourself, writing, directing, producing, and starring in your own film is just too much for you. It is too much for you. So, after that fun fact, the only thing that I could find about this movie, because it was just put out like straight to TV, it wasn't really, that big of a thing. It was in theaters for a couple months, but here in the US, and it was put out to TV everywhere else. So in Sweden, it wasn't made available until 1997, which is 7 years after it was first released. And then it was actually seen as a sequel to Vampire in Brooklyn, which came out in 1995, which doesn't necessarily make any sense at all, because this movie came out in 1990, Vampire in Brooklyn came out in 95, and then this movie was released in Sweden in 97. So that's why people saw it as a sequel, because they felt like the whole Vampire in Brooklyn theme was very similar in both movies, so they just associated both of them together.
Swedish people, I need you to stick to IKEA, because y'all can't be this dumb. But by the way, now you've intrigued me to want to know at least the story of the first movie. But if they thought this was a sequel, that means that this is related. They thought this was related in some way to Vampire in Brooklyn. So that means Vampire in Brooklyn is probably as trash as this movie. I'm not watching it.
Dude, I don't know. Isn't that the Eddie Murphy one? I think I read some decent reviews on that one, if I'm not mistaken. If it's not the Eddie Murphy one, I take back my comments. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I'll look into it eventually and just kind of compare. There's a lot of things on my watch list that, I'm definitely not excited to watch Vampire in Brooklyn anymore, because it's associated in some way to this garbage of Death by Temptation. So I don't know. We'll get to it eventually.
Also, I like how they had to act cool, very 90s. They couldn't say like Death by Temptation. They had to put Death by Temptation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
This dude James Bond is trash, man. Go to your next fun fact.
That's it. That's all I have. There's nothing on this movie because nobody cares about it.
That means this movie's ass. Okay, we thank you all for listening to the podcast. This movie is supreme duty. If you want to follow us, first off, this whole movie got me jacked up. Go subscribe to Horror Pack, because in Horror Pack, you get better movies than Death by Temptation. And you can save yourself $3 by using the code It Follows. If you want to listen to the other podcasts we've done, which included better movies, we did Night of the Living Dead, Candyman, Ma, Us. Go check out our other podcasts. Follow us on social media at The Gruesome Task Podcast on Instagram and at The Gruesome Task on Twitter. If you want to hear me rant about more stuff, follow me on Twitter at _under_the_knife and on Instagram at Deonte and Jose. Where are they going to find you at, sir?
You can find me on Twitter at Spirited Jose. Come fight me on this movie. If you've seen it and you enjoy this, I need you to fight me. Give me your valid points for this movie, because I will literally fight you for hours. But if you want to talk about other movies we talked about, or other movies in general, I'm definitely all game for that as well. You can also find me on Instagram at j.a.gallegos. Let's talk about movies. Let's talk about music. I'm down for anything, as long as it's not 3 hours of Death by Temptation, because I can't stand this movie anymore.
You heard it here, folks. For me, if you think this movie is really good, Jose, he may argue with you. He may fight you virtually on the internet. I'll physically come to your house and I will fist fight you if you think this is a good movie. I'm not playing. Yeah. That's enough nonsense from us. Let's just get up out of here. I gotta edit this. It's late. Thank you all for listening. This has honestly been while the worst movie we've done, this is one of my favorite episodes we've done. So we hope that you all like it. We got big news dropping for the end of the season, and going into season 2. So thank you very much. And without further ado, how many pints of blood are you drinking? If you watch this movie, it's probably 2.
Life sucks, and then you die.